Hi everybody, and welcome to the channel. This is Consciousness Watch, and I'm Paul Ellis. Today's subject, is reality a succession of nows, is one I've been very interested in for some years, and in this video, I hope to show you why. In the last couple of decades, it has become more and more commonplace to encounter, in science and in popular culture, various expressions of the idea that the universe we inhabit is in one way or another not real. The idea being that it, of course, exists, but not at all in the way we perceive it, that it's a masquerade. You likely know the ones I mean, the film The Matrix and its sequels, or the scientific postulation that human experience of the universe is a simulation. There's also the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which theorizes that we experience only one world out of many possible ones. In that scenario, our world would be real, but would provide only a very limited view of what actually exists, so the general idea of illusion still applies. And this basic premise of unreality, that the world is a fiction, is very old indeed. You may be familiar with the concept of Maya from the Vedic philosophy of India, which is usually translated as magic or illusion. Although Maya has multiple meanings, the Encyclopedia Britannica states it originally denoted the magic power with which a god can make human beings believe in what turns out to be an illusion. But perhaps the best known expression of this idea, in the West anyway, would be the allegory of the cave from Plato's The Republic. In it, he describes a world where prisoners are chained in a cave. They face a wall and can only see the shadows of various people and objects behind them, projected by the light of a fire, also behind them, onto the wall. These shadows they take for reality, completely unaware of any world beyond the shadows. And there are probably countless other examples of this unreality theme. But is this general idea of physical reality as illusion useful to anybody in any practical way? After all, simply pointing out that we're in a matrix or artificial reality doesn't do much good on its own. Is there any way this discovery could help us to either A, wake up out of the illusion, or B, learn to operate more skillfully within it? Happily, it looks like there may be reason to think so. Recent research in physics is giving us fresh eyes, capable of seeing the nuts and bolts that create the realities we experience. Interestingly, this research centers on the nature of time. In his book, The End of Time, physicist Julian Barber takes the radical stance that time does not, in fact, exist, that it is an illusion. As Barber sees it, our conscious experience of time flow arises from change, that is, the changing patterns in all the data in our conscious awareness, whether it be thoughts, sensory perceptions, or any other kind of experience. He considers every moment a distinct snapshot, which is composed of this experiential data and is complete in and of itself. He calls these snapshots nows. By the way, in a recent video I made about the Mandela effect, I mentioned I'd have more to say about the mechanism of reality shifting, which I think underlies the Mandela effect. If you haven't viewed that particular video, you might like to. But either way, the ideas in this video stand on their own. Simply put, I think these nows Barber posits are at the core of reality shifting, but more about that later. We can unpack Julian Barber's thesis of how the arrangement of nows creates our experience of reality with this illustration. A now is like one frame of a film reel, which of course exists simultaneously with all the other frames in the reel. It's only when they're passed sequentially through a projector that the frames produce the illusion of motion on the movie screen. The story told by that motion, says Barber, is all our experience of time really is. Separate nows, like separate frames of the movie reel, have been arranged in a particular order to tell a smooth and continuous story. But as Barber puts it, the cat that jumps is not the same cat that lands. They're distinct, existing in different nows or different frames. According to Barber, the nows all exist simultaneously in a huge Platonic environment that is completely timeless. He calls this realm Platonia. Platonia is the ultimate arena, not space-time, and it holds all possible nows in an enormous database. Again, all the nows exist simultaneously and are pulled from the database and displayed in the space-time framework we know. With his Platonia terminology, Barber is invoking Plato's theory of forms, which proposes that the objects of our physical world are replicas of forms, perfect templates, you might say, for our physical objects. These forms exist in another world which, like Platonia, is transcendent to time and space. Barber's theory has surprising implications for the essential questions of physics. For instance, the idea of a cause for the Big Bang isn't part of Barber's cosmology, because a cause would require a flow of time, which his cosmology doesn't have. Instead, he posits a timeless realm where the nows can be arranged and rendered into the space-time world of Big Bangs and everything else. I'll come back to that point shortly. If the physical world is illusory, Barber's work gives a picture of the real world that might underlie it. But it's timeless, whereas our human experience is still one where time prevails. In The End of Time, Barber says the nows can be linked to produce the flow of time, but he doesn't provide much explanation as to how that happens. So is there any way to gain insight into the mechanism that allows the simultaneous nows to be laid out in the linear time structure we experience? Again, contemporary research in physics is providing just that kind of insight. In her story, physicists investigate the structure of time with implications for quantum mechanics and philosophy. Science journalist Lisa Zyga looks at the research of three physicists: Mir Feisal, Mohammed M. Khalil, and Surya Das. In the article, which is on science news site phys.org, Mir Feisal is quoted as comparing the physical universe to a movie or a motion picture in which a series of still images shown on a screen creates the illusion of moving images. He takes the view, like Julian Barber, that our experience of physical reality is based on the continuous flow of changing patterns in our consciousness. He goes on to say that this perception is an illusion produced by a discrete underlying mathematical structure. Specifically, the mathematics, as Zyga's article explains, indicates that the structure of time can be thought of as a crystal structure, consisting of discrete, regularly repeating segments. So we return to the idea that the mechanism by which we experience time is like the individual frames in a film reel, being projected one after another in the desired order onto a screen. But now we'll add that the frames are projected at a certain rate, say 24 frames per second. These correspond to the discrete, regularly repeating segments, the crystal structure of time, which the research of Feisal, Khalil, and Das reveals. That is, the nows of our experienced reality occur at regular intervals, or time slots. It's sort of like the flow of identical boxcars on a passing train, or the frequency at which a piece of music is digitally sampled. So, how brief are these time slots? Zyga points out, the smallest physically meaningful interval of time is widely considered to be the Planck time, which is approximately 10 to the minus 43 seconds. This ultimate limit means that it is not possible for two events to be separated by a time smaller than this. For us, this means that the frames of the movie we experience can't flow faster than this Planck time limit, although, of course, this rate of change is much faster than we can perceive. The implications of the research I've cited are remarkable, and those interested can find Feisal, Khalil, and Das' paper, Time Crystals from Minimum Time Uncertainty, in the European Physical Journal C. But even without a review of their highly technical paper, it's possible to see that their work, taken with that of Julian Barber, provides a framework whereby an ultimately trans-physical reality can be understood to manifest in the physical world. To say this is noteworthy is an understatement, and it may have tremendous significance for some of science's enduring questions. Let's jump back to the idea from before that the origin of the Big Bang universe creation phenomenon never comes into play in Julian Barber's cosmology of nows. It couldn't, because Barber's Big Bang exists side by side, simultaneously, with whatever moment science might conventionally conceive of as having preceded the Big Bang. Now, it isn't that, coming from this perspective, useful scientific work examining the precursors of the Big Bang couldn't continue to be done, but it would be understood to be operating within the parameters of an illusory physical world derived from the Platonic world of nows. In short, the notion of trying to find an ultimate origin of the universe from within the physical universe would be abandoned, because whatever preceded the Big Bang from our usual linear time point of view didn't cause it. Whatever it is simply another frame in the film reel, existing simultaneously with the frame that contains the Big Bang. With this understanding, research on the universe's ultimate origins would shift to focus on Platonia. And there are other large-scale implications as well. Consider the enduring mystery of the genesis of life on our planet. Scientific work in this area focuses on hypotheses like the gradual evolution of certain chemicals, along with energy provided by our sun or lightning strikes, resulting in the first organic life. But nothing definitively causal has been discovered. But from the perspective of the physics we've been looking at, biologists really shouldn't expect to find the first instance of a living organism as having been brought about by any combination of causes, chemicals, sunlight, etc. Rather, the first organism exists outside of time as its own frame on the film reel. From this understanding, biologists would no longer pursue the origin of life from within the physical realm. They would instead comprehend it as a discrete now, a particular frame on the reel, containing the characteristics we call organic life. From our perspective, as we order the frames to make our experience of time, it would simply be the first of many frames with those biological characteristics. Life has come into being, and on it goes. Although this does beg the question, what is it that controls the ordering of nows, such that the universe has the consistency that we experience? After all, life in any form comes into existence and tends to stick around, at least for a while. But hold that thought for a moment. The theory of evolution is another area that could benefit from the research presented. Though much work has been done in paleontology and evolutionary biology, there is still no conclusive evidence that one species becomes another, even though that is the prevailing scientific view. Here again, in light of the discoveries in physics I've mentioned, science would not expect to see that parent-child relationship between species. Instead, they would understand the appearance of any species as the first now which includes that species. It's the initial frame of the movie where a new character has joined the plot. The newcomer may resemble other characters, but is not causally derived from them. But we're talking about a first frame, one that will be followed, as we experience linear time, by many others comprising the lifespan of that new species. So we're back to the question from before. What is it that causes the arrangement of the frames in the film? How is it that we experience this new species as having a continuous existence? We've seen that the structure of the individual moments of time is like film frames, but that doesn't tell us what arranges the frames into recognizable narratives, the stories of our world and our lives. To use Julian Barber's language, what orders the nows? In The End of Time, Barber proposes that resonance is the ordering agent. While he doesn't discuss this at length, he does say, the ability of each now to resonate with the other nows is what counts. Its chance to exist is determined by what it is in itself. And he says, our existence is determined by the way we relate to, or resonate with, everything else that can be. Another exciting proposal for the arrangement of the nows comes from the work of Dr. Robert Lanza, specifically his theory of biocentrism. Lanza doesn't mince words. He directly espouses that consciousness brings the universe into being, rather than consciousness being something that arises from it. He suggests that physics and chemistry would profit from placing biology, specifically consciousness, which is a property of living beings, at the center of their scientific considerations. I think our inquiry here would benefit as well. Could consciousness be the agent that arranges the movie frames into the story of human experience? Is it the author that orders the nows so that we can perceive the flow of time in, first, our individual life stories, and the origin and continuance of the universe, and the genesis and progress of life, and the distinct appearance and ongoing lifespan of the various living species? Lanza thinks so. In a lecture at the 2010 Science and Non-Duality Conference, he stated, amazingly, if you add life and consciousness to the equation, you can explain some of the biggest puzzles in science. For instance, it becomes clear why space and time, indeed the properties of matter themselves, depend on the observer. Lanza says reality is a process which involves your consciousness. But he goes further. The universe and all of its parameters simply reflect the spatial-temporal logic of the animal observer. In other words, the logic of our consciousness invokes the experience of the objects and events of our lives. It's worth mentioning that Barber, I think, would consider these objects and events as the elements comprising the nows. Lanza elaborates by pointing out, as many people know, that we don't literally see out of our eye sockets. What we call sight occurs when electromagnetic energy is absorbed by the eyes, processed by the brain, and then displayed in the three-dimensional space we call our visual field. This is part of the mechanism consciousness uses to arrange the movie frames of reality for our experience. In fact, Lanza uses the film reel and frame metaphor to explain these ideas as well. Like the other scientists I've mentioned, Lanza's work also explores the nature of time. In a recent paper, he and co-author Dmitry Podolsky argue the fundamental laws of physics, when reduced to equations, work just as well for events going forward or going backward in time. If the laws of physics operate without regard to time, then why do we experience reality with the arrow of time going strictly from past to future? Lanza says, in that article we explain how the arrow of time, and indeed time itself, emerge directly from the observer, that is, us. Our paper argues that time doesn't exist out there ticking away from past to present, but rather is an emergent property that depends on the observer's ability to preserve information about experienced events. In Lanza's view, time belongs to us, to the observer, rather than to the observed. In fact, neither Barber nor Lanza regard time or space as objective, fundamental realities. I suspect that what we call space-time is a virtual reality environment where consciousness brings nows into manifestation. Now, the idea that things and occurrences don't exist objectively outside of us prompts me to wonder how it is that individual people can have a common human experience of the world at all. In other words, how do we share the nows? Personally, the idea that I find most persuasive is that some experiences are local to a single person's awareness, whereas certain experiential commonalities, the familiar effect of gravity, for instance, or agreement as to the recognition of basic geometric shapes or colors, or the parts of the human body, are due to a shared human experience. That is, certain nows are perceived by a collective awareness, and others are experienced by us individually. And since human consciousness participates in both collective and individual spheres, we engage in two types of focus, one which creates things in common, and one which brings about individual experiences. Other examples of nows we share are the Big Bang, origin of life, and evolution of species scientific phenomena I mentioned before. Now, I asked earlier if the ability to understand the relationship between the deeper reality of existence, Platonia I mean, and our usual illusory space-time world had any practical value. Would it help us to either A, wake up from the illusion, or B, play the illusory game in a more satisfactory way? As to A, I think the ideas I've mentioned so far can provide a different model, a different lens, through which we can regard our personal lives. Some regular practice of quiet, of stillness, coupled with consideration of the ideas we've explored, can begin to loosen our habitual patterns of relating to the physical world in the traditional way. A simple meditation practice, for instance, in which we remind ourselves that our sense perceptions and our thoughts are simply quickly passing frames of the mind's movie reel, can provide a sense of freedom or release from the stressful life experiences we frequently have when we regard the movie as fundamentally real. This can allow us an experience of self, of our own consciousness, in which we are a sort of witness to the parade of film frames rather than a movie character constrained by them. And as to B, the notion of playing the illusory game more successfully, let's look at the idea of agency, of human choice. If consciousness is ordering the movie, it's choosing to construct a story in a particular way. It does this, I think, according to the focus of our attention. There are many historical examples for this principle. An especially good one is the profound success of the civil rights movement in America. What was their mantra? Eyes on the prize. In other words, the disciplined focus of consciousness was at the core of the movement's success. And it's the same with great success in athletics. Focus, focus, focus is a central tenet of sports psychology. This idea isn't fancy, but it is very powerful. To state it clearly, the focus of conscious attention literally brings certain possibilities into being. That is, it selects certain specific nows to be experienced and leaves others dormant. Based on the science I've mentioned, I think this is most probably how it works. Again, certain selections are done individually, and others are done collectively by various groups of people or by our planetary society as a whole. Viewed this way, our specific focus of awareness at any given time can be understood as a creative choice, an act of agency. From this perspective, our focus of consciousness can be viewed with newfound respect. We can see it not just as the cursor on the computer screen of our minds, but as a creative mechanism we, in a very real sense, use to endorse and call certain realities, certain nows, into existence. Directed attention is a creative force in our personal and our collective lives. Various works of philosophy and metaphysics, both ancient and modern, advance this idea. The Christian Gospels say, "Ask and it will be given to you." While this notion is typically thought to mean that a deity will respond to our prayers, I think it holds a deeper meaning. Specifically, to ask is to focus conscious awareness upon something, to select a now to be given, that is, to take physical form. Certain modern teachings posit a principle or law of attraction, where the focus of attention operates to bring a now into being. The idea is the same. But I mentioned before I'd have more to say about reality shifting and how it relates to the nows. Again, I discussed reality shifting in my previous video on the Mandela effect. I think the general idea, as I've said, is that the nows of Platonia exist in an unimaginably large universal storehouse of latent possibilities, a sort of vast database of potential objects and events. In fact, it's a lot like the concept of the Akashic records from certain metaphysical philosophies, but that's a topic for another time. And it's my suspicion that what people call reality shifting is actually a process whereby consciousness calls various nows into being. In other words, reality shifting isn't just a technique of jumping between realities, but also a process of invoking certain nows from the Platonia database and calling them into our experience. Reality shifting obviously refers to the process of our navigating between realities, but whichever ones we choose are constructed by consciousness assembling the appropriate nows from the Platonia storehouse. We do this continually and imperceptibly quickly to form the flow of our conscious human experience. Well, what is it about consciousness that can act to attract a particular now? Like Julian Barber, I think we're talking about a mechanism of resonance. Resonance is at play everywhere in our universe. Take two identical tuning forks, hold them in close proximity, strike just one of them, and the other will also vibrate. It's the same idea with consciousness. What you focus on causes you to emit a specific vibration, and a corresponding now, by principle of resonance, is called into your experience. It's a sort of call and response. Will this focused application of consciousness bring you millions or a movie star to marry? I make no such predictions. But isn't the general idea, as a force for creative agency in our lives, worthy of our consideration? I suggest we take it seriously. Thanks for watching. Till next time, this is Consciousness Watch, and I'm Paul Ellis.